Welcome to week 3 of the Learning Analytics and Knowledge 2013 Open Online course. It's a great pleasure to have all of you here, and a particular pleasure to have Charles Severance involved. I suspect most of you will be familiar with Charles's work, both as an academic and as being very active in the development of Sakai and open source movement in other areas. He's taught a series, well, I guess he's taught a recent MOOC through Coursera, and I suspect will be doing so again in the future. He's certainly an individual who has a depth of knowledge around the impact that technology has on the learning process, ways in which it might be going, but he has a solid grounding in sort of the historical roots of analytics, or not analytics, but technology, which means we get away from the surface level love-in that comes from everything is new that comes out of Silicon Valley. So I certainly appreciate that perspective on his end as well. And he's going to give us an introduction to the IMS Learning Tools interoperability. So I'll throw it over to Charles and take it away. There will be time for questions. Charles, I will track questions in the discussion forum, so if any questions do come up, feel free to ignore that and I'll address them to you when there's a pause.
Okay, thanks George. It's great to be here. And my intent is to go 30 or 35 minutes and move through the slides really quickly and get on to the questions. And actually I taught a MOOC in Coursera with about 50,000 students, and I've got another version of that MOOC. It's the second time around, starting Friday, March 1st. And so I think I got 28,000 students signed up for this one. And of course there's a lot of really wonderful things that happen. There's good things and bad things that happen when you have 28,000 students or 50,000 students in a class. And the good news is that while there's not announced IMS Learning Tools Interoperability, the topic of today, apparently in the Coursera labs they've got LTI working in the Coursera software. I don't know I don't know when they're going to do it, but the nice thing about that is from a teaching perspective, Learning Tools Interoperability allows us to build our own gadgets rather than depend on the vendor. And in Coursera's class, or Canvas's case, in Coursera's case or Canvas's case, or even Blackboard's case, it's really difficult for a single teacher to have a particular kind of auto grader or a music tool that meets their teaching needs. But from the perspectives of this learning analytics class, it also means that the data belongs to you. If you build something and you plug it into Coursera and the students use it, if you build your own peer grading system and you have Coursera send the students for their peer grading to your system, then you own the data rather than Coursera own the data. Don't tell them I said that, but it means that you can participate to some degree in the learning analytics. And just to kind of bring it also to learning analytics, while there is nothing in LTI having to do with learning analytics in particular, I've heard from a number of small learning analytics companies who love LTI, not because LTI gives them an API to pull out learning data from learning management systems, but once you can launch and put your tool inside the learning management systems, then they write proprietary calls to get all the learning analytic data. And so it gets them in the game. It doesn't necessarily give them the data that they need, but it gets them in the game in a way that gets the local people quickly excited about their product, and then they get access to the data later through more proprietary APIs that are unique to the particular learning management system. So, so what is LTI? I just told you how awesome it is and how important it is, and it is the meaning of the future of educational technology. But at some level, I'm a plumber, and I just make sure that the toilet's flush and the hot water comes and the cold water comes out. And so to some degree LTI is not the actual thing that makes a difference, it's just the plumbing. Now plumbing is important for civilization to continue, and so this is a protocol. It's a standard, it's a protocol. The people that read these documents are mostly programmers from Blackboard or Canvas or Sakai, and they write code and they make it work. So it's a really simple single sign-on protocol. It's potentially the world's simplest single sign-on protocol. It's kind of like OpenID. It is based on OAuth, but the difference is in LTI, once you're in the learning management system, it knows who you are, and LTI is a way for a learning management system to quickly communicate to an external tool with very little effort who you are what class you're in and what role you are in that class. A single sign-on like OpenID does not understand that information. Frankly, if we didn't have to deal with courses and roles and multiple things like that, we could have used OpenID, but we can't. So it makes it so that you have all your buttons in the LMS, and some of those buttons are running inside the LMS, and some of those buttons are running outside of the LMS. And so it really solves the problem that a company, in this example, a little note flight company that wants to write music grading software. Now we could go to the Blackboard conference forever and we could all vote on whether or not Blackboard should put music grading software into Blackboard, and the poor music teachers would lose that vote every time. It'd be 1,000 to 2. 1,000 people would say, no, we need a better wiki, and 2 people would say, like, we need music. But it turns out for those music teachers, that's essential, right? It's not like somehow because there's so few music teachers that their needs are less important. So let's just say you want to start a company, like NoteFlight, which actually is a real company, and you're going to sell to music teachers or sell to state systems to say, look, I'm going to sell you a product for all the music teachers in your state. And what are they going to use as a learning management system? So you can build a piece of software that has a little JavaScript in it and plays some music and does this and that and the other thing. But the problem is you want to run that in Blackboard, you got to build a building block. And it costs like $100,000 bucks. And then you want to do it in Desire to Learn. Well, you got to pay them some money. You want to do it in Moodle, you got to hire some people. And you got to hire people that know what's going on, and these people are expensive. And so sadly, too many of these little companies that want to build a gadget or widget or extension point, they put it in Blackboard and then they stop because they really can't afford to do the rest of the marketplace. They might do a Moodle thing or a Sakai thing, but then Sakai releases a new version and their thing breaks, and it's like, oh crap, we paid for it, we didn't get a lot of money, so we're not even going to upgrade it. We're only going to support Moodle 1.9. I'm sure there are plenty of things in this world that only support Moodle 1.9. And so the problem is all those things are simply proprietary. Hey, can I draw on this? Let's see if I can draw. Draw. Oh, color, what color? Let me get a yellow here. Let's see if this works. Draw. Oh, there we go. Hey, I can draw on this. Hope you're all seeing my drawing. Yeah, and so these used to be proprietary, and you pretty much could figure somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 for each of these integrations for a little tool that itself is going to sell for $5,000 to $8,000, and it's just the economics were terrible. So LTI is a way for these people to write one integration and have free integrations to everything, to walk into any campus and say, hey, what are you running? They say, oh, I'm running Canvas. Boom, it works. Let me type a few things. Oh, I'm running Moodle. That works too. Oh, I'm running Desire to Learn or Blackboard. It works. Or I'm running Sakai. So that's what's really, how do I clear this now? Clear. I bet one of these buttons does that. I don't know, maybe when I hit the next slide button. I should. Next slide button. I guess it clears it then, so I'm feeling better. So here's an example of that very same NoteFlight running inside of Blackboard. This is up here is Blackboard, and this little part down here, that's NoteFlight, right? And then there's the same thing running inside Sakai. And the point is this little company can focus on building the best application that they can build and not necessarily spending a lot of money working on Sakai. They don't even know what Sakai is. They never downloaded Sakai. They don't have a Blackboard developer license, nothing. It doesn't matter. They wrote PHP code and they plug into both. And so it's really quite a beautiful thing. So here's an example of something that I'm using right now. Not only am I teaching a MOOC on Coursera, but I created my own MOOC environment called Dr. Chuck Online, mostly because I want to experiment. And like many of you, I'm curious what's really going on inside, and so I need the whole data. So I'm teaching a Python class using my own MOOC. And surprisingly for a Sakai guy, I'm using Moodle to teach my class. And it's because I could get free PHP hosting on really good servers, and I couldn't get free Java hosting on really good servers. And you know what? I'm using LTI, so it just doesn't matter. So if you were to go into my class, you would see a discussion forum sitting right in the middle of my Moodle, and it's Piazza. Well, Piazza is an LTI tool. So I really didn't care when I started out whether I was going to use Sakai or Canvas. As a matter of fact, I've talked to the folks at Canvas and Blackboard, and they may redo this course, exactly the same course, it's all open content by the way, in Blackboard course sites, and redo the course in Canvas. That'd be kind of weird, because I do work for Blackboard, but it's open content. So how can I stop Canvas from teaching this class? And in all situations, they could all use Piazza, because Piazza's LTI. You click it, it pops up in a new frame, and then we're using the Piazza threaded discussion. You guys may be using Piazza too, right? Okay, so this, as George sort of mentioned in the beginning, this has been a passion of mine for a long time. I come at this as sort of both a computer scientist and a teacher, and I come at this as I, as a teacher, want to have more control over my learning environment, both access to data, adding functionality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so this tattoo you see is real. It's a lot easier to just have a real tattoo than to put a fake tattoo that complex on every single morning. And I was at the recent Moodle Moot in Los Angeles, and that's Martin Dugiamas, and of course the inventor of Moodle. Let's make a mustache on it. Hi, Martin. And then this is Dave Mills. Dave Mills is the creator of the Angel learning management system. I'll put a mustache on Dave as well. And so we were posing with my awesome tattoo, and I've challenged them both. But like I have the Moodle tattoo. There's Martin, and then there's an Angel tattoo right next to it, right there, and that's Dave's system. And so I call this the Ring of Compliance. These are the first 8 pieces of learning software and Canvas is there too. Where Canvas is over here, they got a new logo now. Okay, so I'm pretty serious about this stuff. So if you go to the developers.imsglobal.org, there is a catalog of all the learning management systems that do this, the tools that do this. It's really getting quite impressive. The tools that are doing analytics are not on here because you don't actually have to formally register. You have to pay a little money to get on this list, and so some people just use LTI under the radar, and then they show up later, and then they end up on the list, and so that's at developers.imsglobal.org, and that's just paging down to see all the kinds of things. Ooh, that's the old Canvas logo there, so they ought to fix that. And the other thing that I like about this is it allows low-cost competition. So I talked about the NoteFlight, which is a small commercial company, but My Open Math is one crazy faculty member, and he, by himself, is competing with Pearson's My Math Lab. And he is building a math classroom, a math testing environment, and he's got these things plugged into Canvas, he's got it plugged into Sakai, he's got it plugged into Blackboard, and so he's just his little entrepreneur, I guess nonprofit entrepreneur is probably the best way to think about it. And I just love this notion that teachers can turn into publishers. And we're seeing this more and more where books are becoming interactive dynamic websites with learning capabilities inside of them that create social learning possibilities around content. I think the book of the future is really going to be very interactive. And LTI means that you adopt my book and you'll just adopt my whole thing. It'll have tests and auto-graders and all kinds of things for my Python class that you can use when you teach your class. And the fact that you don't have to change your learning management system, and LTI allows that all to happen. So let me talk just a little bit about how this thing works on a technical level. Skip that slide. We've got the specification that you can go read, and it talks about all the post parameters and how to assign the post parameters. It's a relatively short specification. It doesn't have too much verbiage in it. It's pretty readable. We've got sample code that goes along with that, and you can download the sample code from the IMS website in PHP. This is an example of the data that is sent between the learning management system and the external tool. So the use case is you got some buttons over here, and you press the button, and then an iframe or a pop-up opens up, and then this data is put in that iframe, and then signed by the learning management system using the OAuth message signing, and then it's posted to the external tool. So the external tool sees this data coming in as incoming post data. And at that point, it knows things like the primary key of this particular user in that learning management system. It knows what learning management system they're coming from. It knows which course they're coming from in that learning management system. It knows the title of the course. It knows the link they clicked on, if there's multiple links in the course. It knows the text in the link that they clicked on. And so what often happens is the first time you see a user, you use this person's name and their email and their primary key to create a user account on the remote system, silently, just create the user account, and then you set them up with a login, and then you redirect to the beginning of of the application. So it's about a quarter of a second, and you just create an account. It's like you enrolled at that point. It's auto enrollment and single sign-on, all rolled into a single post message signed by the LMS, passed through the browser using a security protocol, called OAuth. And I am so thankful that we ran across OAuth. OAuth was built by Google and Twitter and Netflix and all these folks to sort of do fine-grained authentication, so that you know your Facebook account says, well, I've let this application have permission to this, 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 and this other application has permission. That's all using the OAuth protocol, basically. And the nice thing about this is we're not using all the OAuth protocol. We're actually using about half the OAuth protocol, just the signing part of it. But for those of you who have ever done anything in security, the worst thing you can do is invent your own security system, because then the only way that it's really easy for a computer scientist like myself to build a security system that's 95% right. Unfortunately, that's not very good for a security system, because the only way that you find what's wrong, what the 5% that you didn't think about are, is people break into your stuff. Well, so actually before we used OAuth, I had my own security system that I'd come up with, and it was really brilliant, and it was exactly 95% right. So OAuth has actually had a couple of things, and they've even tweaked it and improved it. And so OAuth is really gorgeous. It's really simple, but people like Netflix depend on it, and so it's right. So I didn't build it. I'm very thankful that I didn't build it. That would be a terrible mistake. Now, in order to allow assessment data to flow back and forth, LTI 1.1 is the release of Learning Tools Interoperability, where we added the ability to send assessment data back and forth. And so it sends a couple of different things in addition to all the data about who the user is and what their role is and what their primary key is. It sends two pieces of information. It sends a what we call the source did. And what the source did is it's basically, if you think of a grade book as rows and columns, where the columns are the assignments and the rows are the people, this is a particular cell in a particular class's gradebook. It's a unique key to a cell in a gradebook. And so what happens is the tool, if for this particular student wants to then send a grade, it just identifies it with this. It doesn't have to say, go find a column, go find a student, go find a whatever. It just goes like, I'll keep track of this GUID, this ID, and that ID will refer to whatever row column slot that this original launch came from. So all the tools then have ways to flow data back in to the gradebook without really knowing much about the gradebook. They just know this user in this link is the grade goes there, and if these things aren't there, then no grades are accepted for this user. So it's a way to indicate grades will be accepted, and it gives the URL for the service callback to send the grades. So if we take a look at this, the learning management system effectively sends the user data across to the tool, you know, username, user key, et cetera, and it sends this callback for grades, this endpoint for taking grades back, and it sends a API key for each cell in the gradebook. So you got your gradebook cell over here. So you got the gradebook cell, right? And so it sends a key, and then this has some simple XML-based APIs that the tool can call, replace result, read result, delete result. And the tool is completely unaware of the mechanics of the gradebook. It's completely unaware of, you know, are you keeping the highest score, whatever. There's all the rules are in the LMS. This is a rather simple one-dimensional API that we use to do that. And so this is a simple API. Now people will argue, and rightfully so, that this is too simple. That's one thing we learned in LTI was if we make things too rich and too complex, people say, wow, I got to wait a whole year to implement this because you've asked for like 14 different calls. This is way too complex. And then if we make it simple, they implement it right away, and everyone complains like, how come you didn't give us 14 calls? So you kind of have to, they're not happy no matter what, but if you give them something that's less than what they really want, they actually are implementing it and not happy, versus if you give them more than what they really want, then they don't implement and they're not happy. So that's why LTI is going to have a series of increasing versions, because we started small to get the market to adopt, and then we expand gently so that the market can absorb the changes and the changes to their architectures internally to really handle LTI and do a really good job of it. So we're extremely mindful of sort of what our role is in being an evangelist. And frankly, making a standard that's not adopted is just a total waste of time. And so the adoption and the broad adoption is part of the job of IMS to get this thing to happen. And we've been doing this for a long time. Desire to Learn was the very first mainstream LMS to implement it. I think they did it in November of 2010, I think, and then Blackboard followed shortly thereafter. Sakai's always had sort of something because I use Sakai as my test. Moodle didn't have it until 2.2, although we had Moodle code early on. But what's really cool to me, what's really sort of brings me great joy, is that new LMS efforts that kind of came out after LTI became normal, like Canvas and Stanford's Class2Go, which is their open source MOOC environment, they just assume LTI. They don't know a world that didn't have LTI. Those of us with old gray hair, you know, LTI is like, oh, this is a recent trend. Well, from Canvas's perspective, it's not a recent trend, it's ancient history. And it's like, great, that's how it ought to be. Standards ought to just be there. And so Canvas has one of the strongest LTI implementations. So that's really exciting, and the fact that LTI is just kind of like part of the natural marketplace is so awesome. So if you think about it, we had this LTI 1.0, which was really just a simple single sign-on augmented by course information and role information that allowed a sort of a creation of an account and a single sign-on at the same time. And then LTI 1.1 put on the tiniest of grade returns. There's no comment. There's just a number between 0 and 1, and that's it. And so it starts out rather small, right? We're rather small, but the pattern is that we want to get bigger. And LTI 2.0 is the next generation of learning tools interoperability, and it's really to get more toward the needs of what people dream of with a service-oriented architecture and learning management systems, versus LTI 1, which is like the minimum we could do to get useful work done. So LTI 1 is doing really, really well, but there needs to be smarter tools, you know, richer outcome support, analytics kind of things, better user experience, etc. And the ability to add new services like learning analytics related services are essential to what we see over the next 5 years of really moving learning management systems to having service-oriented architectures and the smooth exchange of all kinds of data we don't even know yet. And that's one thing about standards, is that it's really hard to completely anticipate in advance all the things that might want to go. And then you create a standard that like says, oh, and here's a complete undefined blob. And that actually doesn't help you either, because then everyone implements the undefined blob a different way, and then you got to fight them to come up with a standard. So it's easier for us to work together, walking forward, saying this is the nice thing. So it's a much richer service model in 2.0. It's really an extensible service model. It needs events. We need to know the external tool if you're going to handle something like Pearson's My Math Lab that would want to know things like, oh, this course was just deleted, so you can delete all your information, or this course was archived, so you can archive it. You don't think about this when you're a tiny little company with 5,000 customers, but when you have 5 million, or I don't know how many Pearson has, zillion, things like events of notifications of loads and stores that provision and deprovision things turn out to be really, really important, let alone things like reading rosters and sending bulk grades back and creating new columns. And so we need lots of services. And so the other thing we need is sort of app stores, where you go find an application and you can cause it to be installed in your learning management system. Right now, LTI 1 requires you to go cut and paste things, moving them back and forth. LTI 2.0 has an install path that is completely automated, where a system administrator goes over to NoteFlight, clicks a couple things, types in a credit card number, says, I'd like to buy that. I'd like to buy a 1-semester license of NoteFlight for $1,000. Bam! And then the next thing you know in the learning management system, NoteFlight's running and all the teachers can use it. And so it's much richer outcome support, and that certainly is going to be important to the folks here in this learning analytics class. And it also needs, like we've done all along, incremental evolution, as well as lots of extensions are necessary to make sure that this works effectively. It's because one thing about standards, I mean, if you think of like the mail standard, you got the standard headers like to and from, and then if you really look at your headers on your mail, you got like about, 8 standard headers and then about 12 or 15 non-standard headers. Coming up with a way to let non-standard things exist long enough to then identify use cases and produce new standards is an important pattern. So LTI2 allows for extensions, services that aren't really part of the standard. They're not a standard, but they're a way to register them and find them and use them and say, oh, here's like 5 services Sakai has that aren't quite standard yet. Here's 8 services that Canvas has, and they're not quite standard yet. But the fact that you can know that you're talking to Canvas and know which standards Canvas talks to, at least the tool writer can get some work done. And then as we realize, oh, these 3 standards are the same across all these things, except there's little subtle details, let's make a standard for those services. So it's a really incremental way of expanding the thing and accepting the fact that people are extending this a lot already, and let's come up with a standard way to capture those extensions and communicate them rather than just a bunch of out-of-band things that says like, oh, Sakai 2.9 does it this way and Canvas does it this way last year, but they changed it a little bit this way. Just come up with a registry for these things and hand that registry across. We're also moving from an XML-based user interface to a JSON-based user interface, and that's going to make the code on both sides just simpler and simpler and simpler. It's just the XML is a pain. The JSON is really clean. We use a thing called JSON LD to model the JSON so we can have much of the strictness that you can have and the validation you can have with XML that's very comforting to enterprise architects. And so that's good. And like I said, there's a smooth path from proprietary extensions to standards-based extensions. So what will start happening as LTI 2.0 comes out is instead of it seeming like kind of a plugged-in thing, it's like, yeah, it's there and it kind of works, and it's real seamless for what it does, LTI 2 will seem more like the barrier between what is the learning management system and what is those external tools will start to blur a little bit. It'll be like, oh, I'm using this thing and I sort of don't even notice that it's outside the learning management system, and that's what we want to get to. And as LTI 2 grows and beyond 2.0, 2.1, 2.2, as we get more of these services that we make available and the vendors start implementing them, then it really becomes to the point where, hey, you can run any calendar you like, or you can run any threaded discussion that you like. And we get to sort of the dream of a service-oriented architecture for learning management systems, but in a way that the entire marketplace supports. And so that's really, I mean, the story is only half done or 1/3 done with LTI, and as the story goes forward, we're going to be increasingly, we don't want to outrun the marketplace. We don't want to have 5 smart people sit in the room and create a 10,000-page document that is perfection, because the marketplace will quickly ignore it. So there's this, you've got to bring the people in, you've got to listen to what they have to say, you've got to do something once a year, twice a year, and slowly but surely you evolve the whole marketplace, not just a particular vendor, up to this high level of awesomeness. So deep publisher integration, learning object repositories are going to come back, I think. Blackboard, of course, has this project called Explore, which is its learning object repository that uses LTI for integration. It's the kind of thing where the outcomes and the learning activity data, it's really going to come eventually, and that's going to come because people need it and people want it, and it's not going to be that painful to do. So, 35 minutes, which is what I'd hoped. Learning object repositories are come back. The problem with learning object repositories before was they were so proprietary. They were such a pain in the neck, right? So they're not a bad idea. They just were badly integrated, and they were very expensive, and there was no competition because the integrations were the great limiting factor. But LTI fixes that. Okay, well, I don't know what we do next, George. What do we do next? How do I get rid of this little button? Oh, that got rid of the button.
All right, thanks, Chuck, for a great overview, and certainly gives a sort of a sense of why it's important. I particularly like the way you framed it up front about the needs and challenges of getting different providers and offering tools or services in the space, and really the limited challenges that they have around being able to develop that for 5, 6, 7, whatever different learning management systems. So very helpful. Could you talk a little bit about what you see the applications being here in terms of analytics? Now, you did mention that you've got the data exchange right now within the LTI specification is limited. You're not sharing a lot of data back and forth at this stage. So what do you see happening in order to make LTI relevant or increasingly relevant from an analytics perspective?
Well, there's really two use cases right away for analytics. And the first use case is when you have something you really care about, like peer grading. I mean, I'll just use the two examples that I'm going to be working with. I have a very different view of how peer grading should work in a large class with 50,000 students, or even a small class with 200 students where they're coming and going dynamically. Peer grading kind of only works when you've got captive audience and they can't escape, right? So I have this crazy idea about peer grading and how it ought to be different in social environments versus kind of this rigorous kind of we're all in the same place, same time, at least same day kind of thing. And that's an experiment. I mean, I'm not sure that's a good idea. I think it's a good idea. So I'm going to build one of these things, and I'm going to plug it into learning management systems, because the vendors are never going to give me this social peer grading gadget thing. But I can gather all the data. I can watch as people use it every single day and watch how, the actual grading and when they log in and what kind of comments they do. That data is all mine. I might be curious later about, like, what time of day do people do this? I mean, what's the mean time to something? And I can't get that if I'm using someone else's tool. So the simple fact that you can build tools that are experimental and emergent and keep all the data for yourself so you can inform the development of those tools, that is right away a big win, and actually doesn't need to send data back to the learning management system at all. Doesn't need any data from the learning management system. It would help to have more data from the learning management system. So that's kind of the get your own data, write your own tool, inform your own tools evolution with that. The other use case is the one I sort of mentioned at the beginning, and that is where you got some analytics platform, but you're not part of a learning management system, right? You're not Blackboard or Desire to Learn or Canvas, so you're outside. But you've got some really cool Hadoop thing and some Node.js and who knows what you've got, right? And you got some data warehouse cube thing, right? And all you need is the data. And so the problem for a vendor who really wants to have an outboard data analytics system is getting somehow enough attention of the owners of the data in the learning management system to let you have it. And this is where people, can I make a blank screen here? Blank screen, blank delete page, how's that work? Escape, there, I ruined it. Delete pages and all items on it. Yes, that's it. No. Delete page. Yes. Yeah. So can I make this lighter? Yeah, let's make it bigger. There we go. Let's pick the color different. Okay, so here's your big LMS, right? And it's got all the data in here. And here's your external tool, and it would like all the data in there. And so the problem is you're talking to the customer up here, and you're saying, hey, I'd like your data. And they're saying, like, I don't want to give you data. Who are you? Why are you? So the people that I've seen do this, they put their tool in an iframe. They have their UI, and they just put it right in the learning management system. And then they say, they might even put sample data with the graphs and all the stuff, and they say, look how cool our software is, and look how it's running in your learning management system and how cool it is, and I got this cool graph, and I got these other things, and I got these alerts, and I send mail out here. But you know what? What I'm missing is all I have in my system is data from another university. And if I could get access to this data here, then all these cool graphs would be you and not me. I mean, and not this sample university that I've got. And so what they've told me is the fact that they can put a user interface and show what it would be like after they got access to the data makes it easier to have the conversation about getting access to the data, if that makes any sense.
There's a few questions coming in. I just want to ask another quick question, though, before we go that route. So the sharing of data, the fact that if I've developed a tool, I get access to that data exactly like, yeah, actually you do have to let go of the talk. The way it's set up here, typically you don't, but I usually run with just single speaker with different groups because you never know if somebody's going to grab the mic in the middle. So now one of the challenges then from an institution, so let's say I work at University of Michigan and I'm developing a systems level learning analytics model that will allow me to identify students, predict risk factors, also connect that to automated interventions and alerts and so on. So one of the difficulties though is that if the LMS, let's say I'm running Sakai, and the tools that are being used by a provider, so I use a different vendor software, all of a sudden I lose a portion of that data, or I need to individually, if you will, negotiate access to that data so that I end up, rather than right now where, let's say, a lot of the discussion is happening in the LMS, if I decide to use a different discussion thread, a different forum, as the person running that program, or as the university that is building this analytics model, doesn't it complexify quite quickly the access to data that you have, because you're going to need to revise your model to really make things more sensible.
Yeah, so that's a different picture, right? So the problem there is you've got the LMS up here, you got Piazza, right? You're using Piazza for your threaded discussion, and yeah, you're linking to Piazza, but then all the data, the analytics data, is building up here. And Piazza thinks that's a great thing, right? Because they, your students are spending 70% of their time in Piazza and none of your time in Blackboard or Canvas or whatever. So all your learning analytics data here, they're never the twain shall meet. And so that what we're talking about is the lack of the data going in this direction, right? Where it's like, give me back the analytics data. And as a matter of fact, you might even have an on-campus data warehouse out here where all that data goes, and you might have some legal requirement to store that data for a few years. So you want to get that data in there as well, right? And so that would be one of those services that we will put into 2.x, right? And that would be something that once we got 2.0 in the marketplace and the ability to add services just like that, then we can start talking about how to do these kinds of things and get people together and come up with a standard that does that. And so that's kind of like a waving hands answer, but it's the only answer that we have. And frankly, sort of other attempts to sort of waterfall this, where you come up with the glorious answer and tell everyone just to do it, have not been all that successful because we don't end up with the right people around the table. The right people are the people like Piazza who are gathering all this data, and the people like Blackboard or Canvas that are doing all this, and not just sort of say, theoretically, this would be a great idea, but say, I mean, I was just at IMS last week, and we're sitting around having coffee, and we're like, hey, what are you going to do? When are you going to implement this? None of that was like public and on the record, but you got to coordinate this stuff, and so the coordination really, really, really helps. And so that's the key. Is everyone wants to do this, and at some point, what's cool about this? Wow, my picture's getting a little sloppy here. Let's go to switch. Another color. I'm really liking this. If you think about it, the LMS is the one with the money, and if they're going to give money to Piazza, it's entirely reasonable to say, as a condition of giving money, once we have the standard figured out, as a condition of giving this money, we want our freaking data back, right? We want it, okay? Or, we'll give you half the money when we launch people, and we'll give the other half when we get our data back. I mean, we as customers are in a powerful position. And then for me, from a market, from a market growth advocacy position, I look at things like Sakai as, you know what, if Blackboard refuses to do this or Canvas refuses to do this, then I will do it in Sakai. And then maybe people will just leave Blackboard or Canvas and come to Sakai because I have this awesome capability. Fortunately, that is not what usually happens. What usually happens is the moment I put something in Sakai that's cool and people start saying, well, Sakai is better now, then Blackboard and Canvas just implement it and Desire to Learn implement it. And then I smile to myself and say, I've won, right? Because the goal was not necessarily to convert everybody to use Sakai, but to get to the point where this data is flowing appropriately. So I do kind of play a lot of the games where, you know, if no one's going to implement it, then I'll make Sakai be the jackrabbit that everyone else can chase. But sometimes it's not. I mean, Desire to Learn was the jackrabbit in LTI 1.0. I mean, Sakai was not powerful enough to be the jackrabbit in LTI 1. But my goal is, regardless of who pays me or pays my travel, my goal is to move the market forward and change how teaching and learning happens.
Okay, and great. Appreciate the overview there. There's obviously a lot of questions around, you know, the difficulty with analytics at a technical level is once you're starting to mess with a variety of different databases, and you know, Piazza is going to have a different data structure than what Sakai would for discussion forums and so on, and it quickly becomes a challenge, and so, you know, eventually you end up being standards all the way down, and because you need to have some specifications. Even the project, the PAR project, the WCET, was funded by Gates. When they looked at starting to bring together data from different universities, it's a nightmare because everyone's got their own data schema, the database schema, and it becomes quite a challenge to pull these things together. And getting that into a better context, I guess at a certain level starts to raise the profile. At what point do you start adding data specifications in terms of working with LTI as well? So the list, I guess, is at the end you're talking standards or specifications indefinitely. I'm just going to go back to a question here that came earlier. I think Malcolm, you just addressed the question that James had asked. Malcolm said, and it might be the context might have changed a bit now, but does LTI 2.0 include any way to describe the sort of metrics this extension makes available? What about indications of data ownerships or statements about what data the tools keep? Think K-12, FERPA, etc.
So the answer to that is LTI 2 exactly wouldn't. So LTI 2 is more of a service discovery and registry mechanism and an application installation mechanism. That would be part of a service. And so, you know, that might be like LTI 2.5 if the thing we did in LTI 2.5 was to build sort of a data exchange service where we talk about ownership and FERPA kind of things, and we get the right people around the table at that point, and that would be LTI 2.5. But for 2.0 and 2.1, it's pretty much get the stuff installed, figure out what services are there, and away we go. And the nice thing is, with LTI 2 is if there are data exchange extensions that people start building, then we kind of at least will have on radar which ones are going. So let me answer the Drupal question really quick. So there are two things to talk about for Drupal. One is on LTI Consumer, where Drupal acts as learning management system, and that was written by a company called Longsight. They're a Sakai partner, and that I think just sits in the Drupal gadget repository. There is another effort out of Penn State by Brian Olendijk, and he is teaching Drupal to be an LTI provider. So he is making it so Drupal tools can be plugged into Blackboard, Sakai, Moodle, Canvas. And so this is this notion of LMS as provider of tools for other LMSs to use is a emergent but really cool notion. I mean, it's the way I'm actually using Moodle is I'm launching Moodle through LTI to provision the accounts from my Hello.
Yeah, you're back. I hear you. I just don't hear you talking, though.
Now I got push to talk. So is that better? Yeah, okay. Now I've learned that I look in the chat to see if everything is good. So this talks about a new pattern of LTI, which we really didn't design, but it's a protocol. So I have this MOOC platform that's Dr. Chuck Online. And then I have Moodle down here. And then I have Piazza down here. Moodle launches Piazza using LTI. My online MOOC registration system, this is kind of like a portal, right? So this is my MOOC portal, MOOC portal. MOOC, that's what it's called, Massively Online Open Portal. But this is LTI as well, and Moodle is receiving the LTI request. Piazza is receiving the LTI request. Ryan Olendike's Penn State Drupal could put Drupal down here too, meaning that he can emit Drupal and have it listen to LTI requests and feed LTI tools back. And so this is what we call the produce. This end is the producer end. It's the tool maker, and this end is the consumer, which is the tool puller, the LMS. So this is consumer and this is producer. So Piazza is a producer, Moodle is a consumer, but Moodle is also a producer to my portal, and I could have my portal launch Drupal as well. Drupal could then also have another thing where it would use LTI to talk to Piazza. So the code that Brian wrote is this code here from Penn State, and the code that Longsight wrote is this code here. Brian may have also worked on that as well. But this is kind of cool because it starts making it so that I'm starting to draw now a campus. Sakai does this as well, not as well as Moodle and Drupal, but I can fix that. So here's Sakai, and what I'd love to do is I'd love to convince Blackboard, especially course sites, to do the same thing, course sites, so that I can take any roster in any registration system that I have and launch a Blackboard course site from it. And then I'll come over here, all right, a Canvas. And if Canvas would do this producer as well, then now I have my campus portal, and I can have any of 5 learning management systems that come from this campus portal, and it's using LTI for the whole thing. Sorry, that was kind of a long answer to a Drupal question. But Drupal was in the answer somewhere, so I'll stop and see if there's any other questions.
Great, thanks for the description there. I'm just looking now at any additional questions coming in. I'll let you read them. It looks like there's one from 2 from Rodney in there.
Okay, so I've seen a couple of questions having to do with time frame for LTI2. So LTI2 at IMS is in what we call public draft, and that means that it is time for people to start implementing it. The public draft of a standard, we can still revise it, and we want engineering to happen. And so we just met last week, IMS meeting met last week in Houston, and we sat around and we tried to sort of schedule who might go first. Now usually what we find is the entire marketplace doesn't implement during this public draft phase. We get 2 or maybe 3 vendors to bite. And it all depends on how strategic they are, right? Who wants to be first? And these days with Sakai and Moodle, we often can find people, myself and somebody else, it's like bam, we buy the pot, right? We write the Sakai code for LTI2, we write the Moodle code for LTI2, or somebody gets a contract to do it, and then bang, there's 2 of them out there. And now Blackboard and the more sort of commercially driven ones like Canvas and Blackboard and Desire to Learn, then they either have to react. But that's not always the case. Desire to Learn is looking at it. Blackboard's kind of looking at it. It probably is the case that you will see LTI 2.0 implementations from Sakai and Moodle. I'm not announcing anything, but I mean, if I had to bet right now, I would think we'll see some LTI 2 implementations from Sakai and Moodle, at least in kind of beta form by the end of summer. And then I think that Canvas and Desire to Learn are likely the two companies that will come quickly. And if Canvas puts its mind to it, it will beat me, and that's okay. I'm perfectly happy. I mean, that's why I have a Canvas tattoo on my shoulder, because I don't care who wins, because the teachers and the learners are the ones that really win in the long run. So you'll start to see implementations coming out in the summer, and I think it'll probably be the 12 months after that as the rest of the marketplace kind of starts matching that. So I think so a year from this summer and a year from summer is when we'll start seeing it. That's just the history of it. That's how it's always been. Yeah, I don't know Blackboard's internal. I mean, I work for Blackboard, but they don't tell me a lot of things. So the session is recorded actually. So I don't work. I mean, I don't know what Blackboard's plans are, and so that's actually nice because I don't know. I know I'm talking to people inside Blackboard, and you know, they ask, okay, how are things going, and who else is doing it, and stuff like that. So I inform them, but I don't know of any Blackboard plans at this point in time. Blackboard is one of the co-chairs of the LTI2 working group in the form of Lance Newman. Pearson is the other co-chair, and so it's not like Blackboard lacks understanding of what's going on, but it's just, you know, in companies there's priorities and things happening. So I can't comment because I don't know where Blackboard's going to go. So I mean, I know Blackboard pays me to work on Sakai, and so I know what I can cause to happen on Sakai, which means I want Sakai to be this summer. Oh, I got to turn off.
All right, well, I think at this point, I know you've got teaching activities that beckon as well, so I really appreciate you taking the time to give us an overview of LTI, and lots to think about, because the big issues that I've tried to argue recently anyway, and you may disagree, but I think we're really sort of at an interesting stage in analytics being used as a lock-in means. You know, once you start to take your data and you tie it to your university systems, let's say your student support services and so on, then suddenly the fact that you are with current LMS or current set of systems means you're going to be tied to those quite strongly, because it's one thing to do, let's say, a migration from Blackboard to D2L or from D2L to Sakai, or you know, those kinds of migrations are complex enough. But once you develop your analytics models that support student success, and that's tied to your student information system, to your LMS, and to other data collection systems, suddenly it becomes quite unlikely that you're going to be really moving a whole lot of those systems out, just because the tie-in to business processes are quite powerful. Anyway, on that note, thanks very much for your presentation here. I'm looking forward to seeing you know, what IMS's future goals are, specifically around data specification, so that we can start looking at more of an open learning analytics format. But thanks very much for your talk here. I'll end the recording and we'll post it online soon.